Louie Tee. Welcome to the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2019 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale. Single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series. We cannot tell how these players are going to pan out. I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so, we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in X said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, get an aggregate score, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer out there, are in total control as this is the You Pick format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this and future videos in this series stating two things: the phrase next and the team you'd like to see next. Some examples would be Vikings next, Mini next, Men next, Skull. You get where I'm going. This is a matter of fact, the next team up in the series is none other than the Minnesota Vikings. And what a disappointment last season was for this Minnesota Vikings group. Coming off of a trip to the NFC Championship game in 2017 with Case Keenum under center, they thought the missing piece to the puzzle was an upgrade at the quarterback position. They go out, spend the richest guaranteed contract, the first fully guaranteed multi-year deal for any player in NFL history, to Kirk Cousins at the quarterback position. They thought they had solved their issues, and they ultimately may have. I still believe in Kirk Cousins, but last year, it did not go the way that they intended it to go. They brought in a new coordinator, John DeFilippo. He did not mesh well with the workings of Mike Zimmer in his mind and how he wanted things to go. Zimmer wanted more run game, and DeFilippo wanted more pass game. The two clashed. DeFilippo was ousted late in the season. And so it was a mess last year. There were injuries galore. Kirk Cousins was under siege constantly because he was behind an inferior offensive line. The defense went through their changes, ups and downs. You had a number of things happen to that defense, none probably bigger than missing your defensive and emotional leader, Everson Griffin, for a nice chunk of the early portion of the season with his off-the-field issues that he was trying to take control of. And so this team was a mess defensively at times, and it weren't the same group we've come accustomed to seeing. All in all, it was a rough 2018 that culminated in the Vikings missing the postseason. And so they're looking to get back on track. And we've always known Rick Spielman to do it via the draft. He's always said, look, we're not going to be major players in free agency. That's not the way we roll. We build our team through the draft, and he has stuck steadfast to that and really has been one of those teams and models around the league that really value the draft, and they spend a boatload of resources on the draft, and then they retain their own. They did it this offseason by somehow miraculously getting Anthony Barr to come back for less money. He had initially agreed to go to New York to play for the Jets for a lot more than he got in Minnesota. Ultimately said, you know what, that doesn't feel right. This is home. This is where I want to be. Comes back to Minnesota. And so they've done a great job of keeping their talent in-house. They did it again this offseason. And so they're hoping to add to what they have on this roster via the draft. Now, to me, way too many goddamn picks. 12 is too many damn picks. You don't have 12 open roster spots on your football team. Obviously, most teams don't have the amount of roster spots available for the picks that they've made. Again, you could have a 7-player draft. You don't have 7 open roster spots most likely, but still, 12 is way too goddamn many. I told you, I'm not one to really nitpick at a draft and tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And I'm not one to tell you what your philosophy should be. Seattle, I told you, they're a dartboard type of team where you take 15 darts, throw them at the board. Obviously, they're not drafting 15 players, but you get where I'm going. The more, the merrier. Hey, if we take more players, we have a higher chance of some of these guys panning out. And so that's the approach the Vikings took. They took the Seattle Seahawks dartboard philosophy here, where 12 picks, let's throw them at the dartboard, see how many of these stick. If 5 of them stick, great. If 7 stick, even better. If 10 stick, hooray, we had a hell of a draft. But this is too many for me. All right, when you start getting into the 6th and the 7th round and you're making 5 and 6 selections, spare me, okay? Generally, the 7th rounders don't make your football team. Now, I've seen more 7th rounders make teams in the last 3 years than I have probably the previous 5 years combined. That being said, 7th rounders are long shots. and they're 7th rounders for a reason. I hate the draft that has 5 or 4 or even 3 7th-round picks. Those drafts drive me nuts. You want to have 3 5th-round picks? You want to have 4 4th-round picks? Knock your socks off. I love it. Knock yourself out. All right? I love those drafts because you're getting quality football players in the mid-portion of the draft. When you get to the end, now you're taking table scraps. Now you're taking the best of what's left. I'm good. You got me scouting guys that probably aren't going to be on your roster, and most likely, let's be honest with ourselves, probably not going to be on an NFL roster when it's all said and done. In any event, 12 picks for the Vikings. They were very busy. I've heard good things about some of these 7th-rounders, including the 2 receivers that they took. Maybe those guys have a chance. One of their 7th-round picks, I absolutely love, and I couldn't believe he was available in the 7th round, but maybe I'm just crazy. In any event, let's get to this Vikings draft and talk about what they were able to accomplish in the 2019 NFL draft. It's a long one. Buckle your seatbelts and grab a Snickers. We could be here for a while. We start in the 1st round. 18th pick overall. Offensive lineman out of NC State, Garrett Bradbury is the selection. So we start this draft off with Garrett Bradbury, and to me, the offensive line was the biggest need for the Vikings in this draft. Let's go through the needs. As you can see in front of you, I have a list of needs for the Vikings going into the draft that I deem to be their biggest needs from what I saw from this team a season ago and after what they did in free agency, losing some guys and acquiring some guys. This is what I came up with in terms of a list. In order of importance, as you can see, offensive line, the biggest need for this team going into the season. Again, the money that you spent on Kirk Cousins in free agency last year, you won't be able to actually see the fruit of your labor unless you protect Kirk Cousins. You can't put what you put in front of him last year. Obviously, injuries had a lot to do with it as well, but you can't put the kind of product in front of him that you did and expect to have the dividends yielded from the money spent on Kirk Cousins. It's just not going to happen. I don't give a damn if you put Tom Brady behind that line. I don't care who you put under center. If the line looks like it did a season ago and performs the way it did last year, you're not going to get the kind of production that you are looking for when you spent the money that you did on Kirk Cousins. That being said, offensive line was the biggest need coming into this draft. You lose Nick Eason in free agency, and not to say that he was a world beater, but he was depth along an offensive line that could use depth. He was depth. He moved on to New Orleans. So an offensive line that was already challenged from a depth standpoint got even weaker. You needed to attack the offensive line. There were talks of potentially kicking Riley Reiff inside. That's how bad it had gotten. It looks like all things have settled down. Cooler heads have prevailed. You've gotten some moves made that will allow Riley Reiff to stay at tackle where he belongs. And now I think your line has been solidified. We'll talk about that. But let's take, as a matter of fact, while we're here talking about it, Garrett Bradbury takes offensive line off of the needs list. You still need more, and you did that later on in the draft, but it's good to get it started on the right foot with the biggest need getting knocked out in the 1st round. Running back, also a need here. Latavius Murray moved on to greener pastures. New Orleans Saints came calling, so the Saints pluck away yet another free agent from you. This time in the form of Latavius Murray, who was the perfect backup in Minnesota behind Dalvin Cook, who was oft injured. And so, hey, Latavius Murray came up big for you in some situations where you needed a guy to step up at the running back position. Now he's gone, and I really don't like the depth that you had at running back after Latavius Murray's departure. And so that's why that's so high on the list. Rock Thomas was a guy that was still on the roster, got caught with a ton of weed in his house. Don't know if the league's going to suspend him or discipline him or anything of that nature. We'll see what happens. But bottom line is running back position is a big need for this team, and they addressed that early on in this draft. Tight end, that's another position that they attacked early in this draft. And Kyle Rudolph getting a little long in the tooth. There's been tons of rumors about his potential departure as well, him being traded. New England keeps coming up over and over. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm not sure that anything's going to happen, but they just released the tight end, and so it's got me to thinking that something's imminent. And so we'll see what happens there, but you do address the tight end position here, and I think it was a smart move. Wide receiver, honestly speaking, I look at your receiver group, and you've got probably the best tandem in all of football with Stephon Diggs and your other receiver who just got a payday not too long ago, and I always forget his name, which is a damn shame because we talk about underrated receivers in this league, and then I forget his damn name. But it'll come to me as it always does, just having a brain fart. But you've probably got the best tandem of receivers in the league. But after those two, what do you have? I mean, obviously, the Laquan Treadwell may be the biggest disappointment of all the receivers in the 2015 NFL draft. He has not panned out. You did not pick up his fifth-year option, and for good reason. And really, after that, it's just a smorgasbord of guys. I mean, I actually like Chad Beebe. Look at that. I can remember Chad Beebe's name, but I can't remember. God damn it, man. I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. But I like Chad Beebe. But again, I don't love Chad Beebe. I don't love any of the other stuff you have. Receiver is a humongous need, if you ask me, for this team. Aldrick Robinson might have been your third best receiver last year, believe it or not. He's not even on the roster right now. So I really felt like receiver was something that you needed to attack. I didn't think you attacked it early enough, to be honest with you, in this draft. But you attacked it late in the draft, and you may have actually gotten some guys that you like. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Linebacker, I just thought you needed depth. This wasn't as big a need. As you can see, it's a little bit down the list. Just thought you needed depth. Just thought you needed to add some more athleticism and depth to that locker room or to that linebacker room, and you did that in this draft. And then defensive line, same thing could be said there. All right, you lose Sheldon Richardson in free agency. He was a big part of your defensive line a year ago. He's moved on to Cleveland, and so defensive line was a need to me, but it's not a huge need. I thought you had enough stuff. Shamar Stephen, all those guys along that defensive line, Linval Joseph, a slew of other guys that are along that defensive line. I said, you'll be fine if you do nothing, but it'd be nice to add another body to that defensive line group, and you did that in this draft as well. So, look, you better have 12 goddamn players. You better have fixed every single need you have on your roster. You got 12 players that you're selecting in the NFL draft. So, with that being said, let's get to this breakdown, and we start with Garrett Bradbury here in the first round, 18th overall selection, 6'3", 306 pounds, out of NC State, 4'9", 240, 34 reps of 2 1/4, 40 career starts, 27 at center, 13 at left guard, so there's versatility there. Tremendous athleticism as highlighted by his combine. The ex-high school tight end Garrett Bradbury showed outstanding command of a position that was foreign to him just 3 years ago. Again, man stepped on the NC State campus as a tight end. All right, got injured, redshirted, and then came back refurbished and repackaged as an offensive lineman. It was a guard initially, and so that first year he played guard. Started 9 games. Started 9 games. The following year, he started the first 4 games of the season at guard and then made the switch to center. And from that point on, he was the starting center for the Wolfpack. And this is a guy that is still learning the nuances of the position. Think about that for a second. A guy that is this skilled, this athletic, and really developed, still is developing. And so that's got to get you excited as well. He's shown command of a position that was foreign to him just 3 years ago. His quickness, strength, intelligence, toughness, and positional flexibility make him a bona fide NFL plug-and-play starter. I think he's going to start day one. I've already heard good things from him regarding camp and some of these minis that they're impressed with what he's done, and he's already entered into the starting lineup. So I'm assuming that means you're going to either move Pat Elflein to guard, or you've got other plans and Elflein is simply a backup at this point. Either way, it's depth. And so with you bringing in Josh Klein in free agency and another draft pick that we'll talk about later on in this draft as another interior offensive lineman, you've got some stuff to play with now. And all of a sudden, it's all starting to shape up for you along the offensive line. And so this was the centerpiece, though. This was the pick that had to be made to give you the kind of flexibility that you needed, because if you have an injury to one of your guards, you could always take Garrett Bradbury, slide him to guard, and insert Pat Elflein back to center if need be in a pinch. So there are a lot of different things you can do now to make sure that this offensive line stays intact. And I thought that Garrett Bradbury was the centerpiece to all of that. And so that's why this pick here was exceptional and very necessary for the Minnesota Vikings to get this draft underway. My comp for him is Weston Richburg, a guy that was drafted by the New York Giants out of Colorado State about 4 years ago, and was a highly sought after free agent when he became a free agent just a year ago. The San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, who are in a zone run blocking scheme, as we know the Shanahans run the ball probably better than anyone in NFL history. They were looking for an athletic pivot man for their offense, and they went and snatched up Weston Richburg, gave him a big contract, and he's been good for them thus far in San Francisco. I see a lot of the same things here in Garrett Bradbury, an athletic guy that can move, that can get to the second level. He's strong. He's got a strong enough core to stand up to the bullies that are on the interior, but fast enough to get to those reach blocks and those tough assignments that you ask of a center, and a guy that can get to the second level with ease and really do some good things for you as a good move player. I love this pick in the first round, 18th overall selection, offensive lineman out of NC State. Garrett Bradbury for me is okay. Disregard what you just saw. I don't know what the hell just happened. Let's try that again. Garrett Bradbury for me is
hit from high. It's a deep. It is out of here.
God damn it, we forgetting names of receivers and prominent receivers at that. We having technical difficulties on the stream. This is what happens when you overload me with 12 goddamn picks. Shit goes sideways. Let's get back on track though. Second round, 50th overall selection. Tight end out of Alabama, Irv Smith Jr. is the selection. So here's a guy that I've already had the pleasure of breaking down, so I'm not going to give you a thorough breakdown of Irv Smith Jr. here. If you're looking for a thorough breakdown of what he's capable of and what he brings to the table for this Vikings football team, go to my Draft Prospects 101 series on the Louie Tee Network. Just go to the playlist section, 2019 NFL Draft Prospects 101 series, and there you will find a thorough film-laden breakdown of all the players I was able to get to prior to the draft, Irv Smith Jr. being one of them. I can tell you this much. He's athletically gifted. He's got good hands. He's physical. He will block. There's a lot to like here with Irv Smith Jr. He was not elite. Okay, the two elite tight ends win in the first round. But he was the next best thing after those two, and that's why he was the next tight end off the board, and rightfully so. And so you got yourself a really good football player here, and he's got the bloodlines in the league. His dad was a first-round pick some years ago by the New Orleans Saints. And so this is a really, really good pickup here by the Minnesota Vikings. In the second round, 50th pick overall. Let's go ahead and take tight end off the board as a need, as the Vikings knock out another important need for them in this draft in the early stages. Second round, 50th overall selection, tight end out of Alabama, Irv Smith Jr. for me is And for those of you who haven't checked out the video that I did on Irv Smith Jr., I told you that my comp for him is Aaron Hernandez, a guy that a lot of people, you want to associate him with the murders and him going to prison. But I'm talking about Aaron Hernandez, the football player. Don't forget just how good this guy was in New England for the Patriots. He was one of the better tight ends in the league, and they had the best tight end tandem in football for a brief period there with Gronk and Hernandez, and he was so good for the Patriots. And I think Irv Smith Jr. can be that type of football player for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward. You go to the third round, 102nd pick overall. Running back out of Boise State, Alexander Madison is the pick. So I'm not going to lie to you. When this selection was first made, I was not a fan of it. I did not think this was great value here in the third round. As a matter of fact, I told you I thought that the Vikings had a deficiency and a shortage at the receiver position, and I thought that that was the better play here because when you look at the running back position at the time of this selection, just about all the good backs worth taking here in the third round were gone. So then you turn your attention to maybe a different position. I like wide receiver. This was the bigger need, though. Running back by far and away was the bigger need, and if you don't get one here, and let's say you don't draft one until, say, the 5th round, now you're in a different territory. See, this guy is still worthy of a third-round selection. I wasn't so sure of that at the time. Had to go back and watch the tape, obviously, but wasn't really sure because I'm guilty as charged of lumping him in with some of these other Boise State runners, and they haven't had the most success over the last couple of years. You get every now and again your Jay Ajayis of the world, but for the most part, they've been hit or miss, and there have been more misses out of Boise at the running back position than hits. So I wasn't really too fond of this selection initially, but I went back, watched the tape, and I started to become a lot more comfortable with this selection. Thought maybe a receiver at this point would have been the better move, or maybe even an edge rusher. But I digress. You know, this was the move here. And so let's talk about Alexander Madison. Let's take running back off the board as you meet another need, a big need at that, getting running back off the board here. 5'11", 221 pounds, 35-inch vert, 10.6 broad, running a 4.55 40. So a sturdy, well-put-together back that showed workhorse potential as a junior with 3 games of 30 or more carries, and one of those games actually having 40 carries for 200 yards in his final collegiate game. While he can catch the football out of the backfield, he isn't dynamic in that regard, and honestly speaking, he isn't dynamic in any regard. More of a Pam Mom, which I use as a way to say proficient at many, master of none type of back that lacks top end speed and any true difference making attributes. Now, I will say this. He is a guy that, like I said, showed the ability to shoulder the burden if you need him to do that. He's also a guy that has shown the ability to be a little bit creative out in space. He loves jumping over defenders. I'm not a huge fan of guys leaping over people in the field of play. If you want to leap over somebody or leap to try to get to the end zone, touch the pylon, that sort of thing, I'm all for that. I'm not for 2nd and 8 at the 46-yard line and you're in the middle of the field and there's a safety there, you trying to leap over him in the middle of the field like Zeke Elliott did a couple of years ago. I'm not a fan of that shit. I always think of Willis McGahee in the national championship game versus Ohio State and him getting his knee blown to smithereens trying to leap over somebody. It just isn't worth it for an additional 2, 3. And let's say you successfully leap over somebody and pick up an additional 20 yards. That's still not worth it, okay? The risk of you blowing up your knee, having somebody put a flush hit right on your kneecap and tearing your shit to shreds for an additional couple of yards, not worth the risk for me. So the risk and the reward have to be equal, or the reward needs to be greater. It's not for me. So I don't like when guys leave their feet in the field of play, but that being said, he loves to do it. I watched a game in which he tried to jump over that same game I talked about with 40 carries. All right. I think it might have been against Fresno. Don't get me to lying. It was for the WAC championship though. The winner of that was going to win the WAC. So I'd like to think it was Boise State versus Fresno State. Either way, he tried to leap over a guy there. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing? And the dude wasn't even that low, and he ended up kneeing him in the face. Bro, what are you doing right now? But he will jump over a guy. I actually seen him jump over somebody and successfully do it and score a touchdown. So I've seen him do it, and it work. I've seen him do it, and it not work. I've seen him make guys miss out in space, which I didn't think he was really that much capable of, because you look at his frame, and he's a little tight-hipped. I'm not expecting him to make guys miss, but he's got a little bit of wiggle to him. There's a little juice there. Not a lot, but enough for him to make guys miss out in space. And so, as I said, as I watched more and more of him, I became more and more comfortable with this selection. Not enough to change his grade or, in the score that I gave him, but comfortable enough that I wasn't going to railroad this pick. So he's a solid backup running back. And that's what you drafted him to be. You didn't draft him to start. But in any event, looking at the history of Dalvin Cook, he may have to start. He may have to take some carries. So he can do that, though. And that's the good thing here about Alexander Madison, that is in a pinch. If you say, hey, look, man, Dalvin's going to be down for the next 4 with a hamstring, we're going to need you to step up. He's like, I can do it. I did it at Boise. I'm ready, coach. Put me in. I'm ready to play today. So from that standpoint, I actually like this pick here in the 3rd round, 102nd pick overall, running back out of Boise State. Alexander Madison, for me, is and the goddamn receiver's name is Adam Thielen. Shit. I should be ashamed of myself. It just came to me. Hooked on a Thielen. I should know that. I should never forget that man's name. And as good as he is, I should be shot for forgetting that man's name. Shame on me. Anyway, my comp for Alexander Madison is Chris Carson, the Seattle Seahawks running back that was drafted in the 7th round about 3 years ago. Now out of Oklahoma State. Big, physical, burly back that had a little juice to him, a lot more juice than people thought coming out of Oklahoma State, hence the 7th round selection. But hasn't been able to stay healthy in his career, but when healthy has been very, very good for the Seattle Seahawks. I see a lot of the same qualities here in Alexander Madison. You go to the next pick for the Minnesota Vikings in this draft, 4th round, 114th pick overall. Offensive lineman out of Oklahoma, Dru Samia is the selection. This is a good one. This is a good pick here, guys. This is another, and I talked about this and alluded to it earlier, how you got another guy in the draft that gives you some more flexibility along your interior of your offensive line. And this is a guy that I don't know how long it's going to take him, but eventually he's going to start for you at one of the guard positions. I'm pretty sure of this. Right now, he may offer you some depth, but eventually Dru Samia is going to start for this Vikings football team. If you're the Vikings, you're hoping it's later rather than sooner, because later means that you haven't had any injuries and you haven't had anybody disappoint you. Sooner rather than later means either you've got injuries or you've got a little bit of disappointment in terms of play, and he's got to step in a little bit sooner than maybe you're comfortable putting him in. But nonetheless, he's got the tools to get it done. Was an anchor on that Oklahoma offensive line. Speaking of which, 6'5", 305 pounds stands Dru Samia, 33-inch arms, 48 career starts at Oklahoma, by far and away the most of that veteran offensive line that saw 4 out of the 5 members of that offensive line drafted into the 2019 NFL draft. Very successful offensive line at Oklahoma. He was the leader of that group. 10 starts at right tackle, the other 38 at right guard. Fluid, easy moving guard that plays with an aggressiveness and edge that sometimes crosses over the line. He was thrown out of the game in 2017 versus West Virginia for throwing a punch. And I know by now you've all seen him get all over Quinnen Williams in that playoff game versus Alabama for what he deemed to be a cheap shot on Kyler Murray, where he goes apeshit and literally tries to go after Quinnen Williams while he's on top of Kyler Murray. So this guy's got a loose screw, but I love it. All right, he's got that edge. Now you got to always remind him, bruh, don't put yourself ahead of the team. Don't pick up a senseless personal foul penalty. But he plays with that edge. You don't want the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for doing something dumb, but you want that edge. You don't want to take that from him, because that's the way he plays the game, with a nasty disposition and an attitude that says, F you. And that's what you want from your offensive lineman. Believe it or not. Not all guys are that way, and you don't have to play that way and have that mindset to be successful, but that's what you want out of your offensive lineman. You want them because, as I've always said, it's nothing nice down there in the trenches. Nothing nice about it. All right? The meanest, most physical, And aggressive guys win down in the trenches. That's Dru Samia, guys. So, his nastiness set the tone for what was an ornery unit up front for the Sooners. While he can win with quickness in the run game, he can sometimes have trouble with quickness in the pass game. If used in his own run blocking scheme, Samia's talents can be maximized and unlocked to potentially be a very good NFL starter. My comp for him is Joel Bitonio, the second round ex-tackle out of Nevada that was drafted by the Browns and ultimately converted to guard. He's been really good for the Browns. I see a lot of the same thing here with Samia, a nasty disposition, a guy that is looking to drive your face and your dick in the dirt on every single snap. This is a guy that I watch just be physical for no reason other than he can, and I love it. Want more of it. And so this is a guy that does have some issues in pass protection at times, but it's not something that can't be cleaned up. And so I love what this guy brings to the table. And for a Vikings team that needs more nasty up front, I think this is exactly what the doctor ordered. And for you to get this in the 4th round, I think it's tremendous value for the Minnesota Vikings. Love this selection. Love it for the Minnesota Vikings in the 4th round. 114th pick overall. Offensive lineman out of Oklahoma, Dru Samia, for me is so as we move on to the next pick, 5th round, 162nd selection overall, linebacker out of USC, Cameron Smith is the pick. So Vikes take care of yet another need. So let's go ahead and remove a linebacker from the list of needs as they take care of yet another need in this draft. So Cameron Smith, 6'2", 238 pounds, 4'6", 40, 39-inch vert. So a little bit of athleticism and movement skills here. And that's probably what I was most impressed with is his movement skills. I'll talk about that here in a second. Let's get to his breakdown. Solid size and athleticism. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when it comes to pass and run defense. Outstanding pass defender that just has a feel for zone drops and depth and can play in certain man situations. I loved watching him in coverage, man. It was a thing of beauty. It's so refreshing to watch a guy that understands zone concepts and understands zone concepts and zone matching and pattern matching, where a guy runs into your zone and you don't too many guys, and too often times I'm watching linebackers run to a patch of grass. Hey, they're like robots out there. Hey, this is where I'm supposed to. It's almost like cover 2 on Madden. You know, the computer is just gonna run to a spot. All right. I don't want guys that are just running to a patch of grass and then turn around and saying, I'm doing my job. I want you to play football. All right? Yeah, you're supposed to drop to about, 10 yards of depth, and right into that hook zone. Yeah, you're supposed to do that. But guess what? This wide receiver is running a drag route, and he's coming through your zone. Don't allow him to run through your zone and sit down right over the middle of the field and be wide open for the quarterback. Run with him, take that option away, and force the quarterback to go elsewhere with the football. And that's what Cameron Smith does routinely. Time after time, I'm watching him see a guy coming into his zone and says, it's not good enough for me to just stand here and say, hey, I'm in this zone. Don't throw the football. I'm supposed to be in the way. He's like, no, I'm going to take this guy away. I'm literally going to take him, and now he's my man until he vacates my zone. I love it. I love it. All right. So, but with that being said, as good as he is in pass coverage, in the run game, he's a mindless robot out on the football field pursuing his responsibility more so than the ball carrier. There are a lot of workable traits here with Cam Smith to the point where meaningful reps could be coming his way early on in his pro career. So let's get back to the run defense thing. As good as he was in the pass game, he drove me equally insane as a rush defender. There were too many times on tape I'm watching him, and his job is to occupy the B gap on the backside of a play. And I'm like, bruh, This guy, it's almost like he's trying to do his job so good that he forces the running back to turn down his gap. And he's saying, well, did my job. Running back took one glance over here, saw me overplaying the backside B gap, so there's no cutback here, so he's just going to take it front side. Well, yeah, he's taking it front side where your ass was standing just 5 seconds ago, and now he's picking up a gain of 12 because you decided to go run backside B gap, and now he's running front side B gap. Don't do that. Don't do that. All right? Have some patience. I'm all for firing your gun. I love aggressive linebackers, but I also like aggressive linebackers that guess right. I don't want guys that predetermine this is where I'm going, whether the ball carrier is coming this way or not. I'm going to go fill this gap and vacate another gap. That's dumb, okay? You're doing the job of the offensive line for them when you run away from the football. Don't run from the ball, run to it. Now, that being said, he was still a high volume tackler, but he could have had even more impact on the game. And that's why he's sitting here in the 5th round, because when you see a guy running away from the ball to go handle responsibility instead of getting a ball carrier, that tells me you're not a playmaker. You're not a baller. You're just a guy. You're a jag. Just a guy. We can find any of those on the street. As a matter of fact, they're called 5th round picks. You can find those dime a dozen. His athleticism, his ability in coverage, he could easily be a 3rd round pick. But when I see you running in the opposite direction of where the ball carrier is going, you're a 5th round pick now. But I like this guy. And that can be coached up. That can be cleaned up. All right. They may have been coaching him to do that at SC. Hey, don't worry about front side. That's what the safety's job to do, is come down and fill and replace from where you left. Your job is to make sure that backside cutback isn't there. So do your job. Maybe that's what they were coaching him to do. I'm not going to beat him up. I'm just telling you what I saw. Bottom line is, it's a solid pick here in the 5th round, 162nd pick overall. Linebacker out of USC, Cameron Smith, for me, is my comp for him is the ex-Stanford Cardinal turned Green Bay Packer, Blake Martinez, a guy that when I watched him, I remember watching him very vividly coming into the NFL draft some 3 years ago or so, 4 years ago, I think it is now. And I loved his coverage skills. I loved his ability underneath to run with guys in coverage, similar to Cameron Smith. The first guy I thought of was Blake Martinez, because a lot of the things I loved about Blake Martinez, I love about Cameron Smith. So that's my comp for Cameron Smith, is Blake Martinez. As we move to the 6th round, 190th pick overall, defensive lineman out of Arkansas, Armon Watts is the pick. Y'all give it up for Mr. Armon Watts. I actually like this dude a lot. All jokes aside, 6th round, good SEC product here. And reason he's here in the 6th round, not a lot of productivity from this guy. As a matter of fact, his last year on the campus at Arkansas was his only year starting, and his 1 year of true production. And so there's not a lot of tape on this guy other than in 2018. So from that standpoint, you're asking yourself, is this a 1 year wonder? Is this 1 year of production, or is this something that this guy can sustain? I actually like this guy a lot, and I think he's going to not only make this football team, because I thought this was a position of need. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and take defensive line off of the needs list as the Vikings meet that need here in the 6th round with Armon Watts. I actually think he can get into the defensive line rotation. You know, there was a void left by Richardson when he left in free agency. I think you've got about a good 3 or 4 guys on the interior that you like: Linval Joseph, Shamar Stephen, Jaleel Johnson. Those are the 3 that come to my mind initially. I may be forgetting 1 or 2 guys in there. I think you're going to add Armon Watts to that list of guys that you like as a rotational depth player along the defensive line. 6'5", 300 pounds. He looked like he was about 290 straight up at Arkansas. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to bullshit you. He looked a little light, but boy, he played like a man that was light, that had an advantage of quickness against these offensive linemen. 33-inch arms, a lean 300-pounder that plays much bigger than his size. excellent anchor versus double teams, plays low to hold his ground in short yardage situations. Also, violent and quick hands allow him to defeat blocks, leading to early wins to disrupt plays. No secondary move when initial attempt is started, though. And so if he doesn't win initially, he's probably not going to get to the quarterback or defeat that block. Nonetheless, when he isn't low, he can be moved with a double team, but he's got good effort and the ability to pressure the quarterback, which I love from an interior defensive lineman. The guy had 7.5 sacks. So he went from little to no production to 7.5 sacks in one season, which tells you, and he led his team from the interior line position as a 3-tech. He led his team in sacks. So that tells you the kind of talent this guy potentially has for you, not just as a run defender, but more so as a pass rusher. So I like this guy a lot. Again, the size worries me a little bit because I told you he looked real lean. Like, I think he might have gotten to 300 pounds post-season. I think during the season, he was every bit of 290, 295 max. But that's nor here nor there. If he can keep the athleticism that I saw on tape and add another 5 to 10 pounds to his frame and get to 305, maybe 310, 310 may be asking a lot. But if he can get to 305 and keep it, I'd feel good about that with the athleticism that I saw on tape from him. Bottom line is, I watched him in a couple of games, watched him against Colorado State, had a sack, a beautiful sack in that game, forced fumble on the play where he just beat the guard, slapped his hands down, beat him with quickness around the corner, and up the field he went, got to the quarterback, knocked the football out, beautiful sack, strip, forced fumble. Watched him against Alabama. That was probably the more impressive game there was in a number of 4th and 1 situations, this guy got so low and stood up to double teams, anchored down, and they could not run it right at him, and they stopped Alabama on a number of short yardage situations, and Armin Watt was one of the guys that was really responsible for that. Saw him defeat some blocks and just be a nuisance in that game. I thought it was some really good tape against Alabama for Armin Watts, and so this is a really good pick up here in the 6th round, man. I really like this pick. I really think there's some potential here in the 6th round, 190th pick overall, defensive lineman out of Arkansas. Armin Watts, for me, is my comp for Armin Watts is Corey Liuget, the defensive lineman for the Los Angeles Chargers that, when healthy, is a really good interior defensive lineman in this league. Can get to the quarterback, is stout against the run, and I see a lot of those same traits here in Armin Watts. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops because Corey Liuget has been a really good player in this league and is a starter. Obviously, Armin Watts, not that right now, but maybe down the road he could develop into a potential starter in this league. We go on to the next 6th round pick, 191st overall selection. Defensive back out of Wyoming, Marcus Epps is the pick. So, Marcus Epps, 6 feet, 191 pounds, 4'5", 240, 38.5-inch vert to go along with a 10'4" broad. So, really solid athlete we're talking about here in Marcus Epps. And this guy was a big-time player at Wisconsin along with another safety that formed a really good tandem for the Cowboys in the WAC conference. Let's talk about Marcus Epps and what he brings to the table here in the 6th round. A playmaking safety in a cornerback's body, Marcus Epps did it all for the Wyoming Cowboys. Blitzer, nickel, single high, box, forced fumbles, interceptions, and was a 3-time team captain. His instincts and ball skills are plus, all right, but his size and speed will produce some limitations along with his minimal burst, but his tenacity and playmaking ability cannot be ignored. So this is a guy that when you watch him on tape, I don't think he has the range to be a single high free safety. I don't think he has the size you're looking for to be a box defender what I think he is going to be, and what I've noticed looking at Mike Zimmer over the years and some of the guys that he brings in at the safety position is he likes to have that hybrid safety as his second safety. You look at Jaron Kearse, and you look at the ex-Notre Dame safety Harrison Smith. Those are the guys that are on the bigger side, just 6'2", 6'1", 6'2", 210 plus guys that are physical enforcers. They can play against the pass, but those guys are bigger guys. And then opposite of them, he likes to have a smaller safety. And you see some of these guys that are on this roster at the safety position, and a lot of these guys are smaller safeties at 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet, but look like corners at about a $190, $195, 197. Rarely are you getting a 6'2", 212 safety opposite of Harrison Smith. And so that's interesting to see that this is the type of player that he likes to have opposite Harrison Smith. And Epps is going to get thrown in the mix along with a bunch of other guys that are similar size. And we're going to see if he's able to stand out from that group and potentially make the team as a 6th round selection. I think that he has a shot. I don't necessarily love him in man-to-man situations. I thought he did a really good job at Wyoming, but the level of competition wasn't the greatest in the WAC. So I think that, and more so, the level of competition with the quarterbacks wasn't the greatest. I thought there were some passes that he picked off that were gifts, opportunities that he didn't miss. Okay, you got to still make the play, but there were some poor passes, bad ball location, and he was able to be the beneficiary of it. And I thought guys had steps on him. I thought guys had opportunities to make plays, and it just so happened that the ball wasn't where it needed to be, and he was able to make plays. I'm anxious to see if his ability and instincts translates to the NFL, and he's able to carry that over and play with confidence like he did at Wyoming and potentially garner himself a roster spot with this Vikings football team. My comp for him is a guy that just got onto this Vikings roster, was a draft pick of the Cincinnati Bengals just a mere 3 years ago or so, I believe it was. Darren Smith, a guy that, as a matter of fact, played in the WAC conference himself as a Fresno State Bulldog, and they look similar to me. Both had storied careers in college for their respective universities. Both of those guys are ball hawks, both similar sized safeties that have cornerback type bodies, both not afraid to hit, but can make plays on the football, both lacking the burst and the twitchiness to be as effective as you would like them to be in some man-to-man situations and over the slot as a nickel, but they both offer you some ability to drop over the slot and play in some underneath zones and have some ability to blitz and do some things. So see Darren Smith as the comp here for Marcus Epps here in the 6th round, 191st overall selection. Defensive back out of Wyoming, Marcus Epps, for me, is so we go on to the next 6th round pick, 193rd overall selection, offensive lineman out of Elon, Oli Udoh is the pick. So Oli Udoh is a guy that has tremendous upside. Now, not ready to perform at an NFL level right now. As a matter of fact, he's one of those classic draft and stash prospects. One of those guys you draft, you stash him away on your practice squad, you work with him for the next year and a half, 2 years, and then you hope you have something when you're done at that point. And if you don't see the growth and the progress that you're looking for, you draft another one of these guys and you move on. If you have the luxury to do so. I think the Vikings right now have the luxury to put a guy on ice, work with him, and see if he's worth potentially starting down the road, or at least being moved into the swing tackle role down the line. But they don't necessarily need tackle help right now as it stands. Now, again, injuries will change that very, very quickly. But if they stay relatively healthy, they don't need a tackle at this very moment. But that doesn't stop you from trying to develop a guy to be a swing tackle or potentially a starter down the road. And so I think that's what this is here at 6'5", 323 pounds, 35-inch arms. This guy is a massive tackle. 5'0", 540, so a little bit of movement skills, but you don't see it very often. Towering right tackle prospect that is far from NFL ready, but at 6'5", 323 with 35-inch arms, he's definitely worth draft and stashing as a practice squad project. Often his feet get stuck in cement and will lunge instead of moving his feet. His feet are as heavy as lead. All right, can be, God, I love Mike Mayock and I miss him, a heavy-legged waistbender at times, but can generate movement in the run game. To me, he's best suited for a power run scheme. You start asking this guy to get out on the edge and run and move, you're asking for trouble. Linebackers and guys that are quick are going to beat him to the spot. They're going to run circles around him and affect the play. But if he's able to get his hands on you as a defender, you're done. He's a big guy. He's physical, and he does a really good job of sustaining when he's engaged. So it's a lot to like here, but there's a lot that needs to be worked on as well here in the 6th round. My comp for him is another long, big defender, no longer in the league, but at one point looked like he could have a promising future in Stephon Hire. Out of Maryland, Redskins picked him up as an undrafted rookie about 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so. Had a shot, even got some opportunities to start for the Redskins at tackle. It did not work out for him as a right tackle in this league, and so he's no longer around. Hopefully the same doesn't come of Oli Udoh, but you never know. You know, you work with this guy, you see what you got, you like what you have. He makes this football team down the line. You don't, you move on, and the rest is history. So we'll see what happens with him in the 6th round, 193rd pick overall. Offensive lineman out of Elon. Oli Udoh, for me, is so we move on to the next pick in the draft, and now we're in the 7th round, and this is where I start to get a little annoyed. You just had 3 6th-round picks. Now you're coming at me with 4 7th-round picks. What are we doing right now? But this is the one that I love of all the 7th rounders. Hell, of all your 6th rounders, and even your 5th-round pick. I would have took this guy in the 5th round. I would have took this guy in the 4th round. But maybe I'm a little too high on this guy. I don't know. It might just be me, but I love this guy. He was like my 6th rated corner in this entire draft. And for him to be sitting here in the 7th round, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. 217th overall selection. Defensive back out of Texas. Kris Boyd is the pick. All right, so one of the guys, and this happens to me every year, I become fixated with a prospect or two just because of all of the tape that I've combed through. And in certain years, there's certain conferences where because of maybe a high receiver output or a high quarterback output, you run into the same players over and over again. So you watch these guys and you say, well, what year is he in? He's pretty impressive. And he just happened to be one of those guys that wasn't a sophomore and still was in college. He's actually a senior and he's out in the draft. And I'm like, man, this guy's going up against everybody. And you had to watch West Virginia tape because you were watching Will Greer and you were watching Gary Jennings and you were watching David Sills. And so you saw a ton of him there. You had to watch Oklahoma tape because you were watching Kyler Murray and you were watching Marquise Brown and you were watching all these guys and all of the offensive linemen. And you ran into him again. And then you were watching all these other teams in the Big 12. I ran into him watching other teams. And I'm like, damn, this guy's really impressive. And I watched USC tape. And They play at USC, and it just happened to be over and over again. All these teams that I'm watching tape on, I keep running into the same guy, and he keep making plays, and I'm like, he's fearless, man. He's not afraid, and everyone was afraid of Hollywood Brown. Everybody was afraid of Hollywood Brown. Not Kris Boyd. He wasn't afraid. He was in his face, deleting the airspace. Now, again, he got smoked a couple of times, but he made plays too. Like, he's not afraid, man. And that's the thing that I love. He would get beat, and as you should as a corner, selective memory, next play. All right, I'm still the man. I'm about to get you back. And I just love his demeanor. I love his physicality. I love his ability to just be in the play. I'd like to see him make more plays on the football, absolutely. But when it's all said and done, I thought that his competitiveness, his ability to be around the football, and his fearlessness, along with his physicality for the position, you weren't going to find many corners that did what he was doing. Now, maybe if he was 6'1", he would have been a lot higher in his draft, but I don't give a shit that he's 5'11", 6 foot. Come on, man. What are we talking about here? So, anyway, I just thought that he was severely underrated in this draft, and I think you got to steal. And let me just say this. This selection here of Kris Boyd in the 7th round keeps the Vikings streak alive. We all know how Zimmer loves his corners. This keeps the Vikings streak alive, and it's got to be the longest active streak in the NFL. I could be wrong, but I don't know of many teams that have selected a cornerback this many years in a row. You have to go all the way back to the 2008 draft, the last time the Vikings did not select at least one cornerback in a draft. This makes it 11 straight years the Vikings have selected a cornerback at some portion of an NFL draft. Dating all the way back to 2009, they've selected a cornerback in every single draft here moving forward. And so this is a great pick. Last year, you got a steal as an undrafted defensive back out of Texas in Holton Hill. He made your roster. This guy's going to make your football team too. That's just how I feel. I could be wrong, but I love Kris Boyd. Quickly. Physical, feisty corner that loves to disrupt and frustrate wide receivers, does his work early and often and locates the ball to attempt to avoid pass interference calls, can be slow in his transition, which gives up an advantage to the wide receiver, but stays in phase, which gives him a chance to make plays on the ball, as evident by his 31 PBUs in the last 2 seasons. That's a lot of pass breakups. Now, on the flip side of that, a criticism to that would be turn some of those PBUs into INTs, which is a fair argument. He lacks that twitchiness that you need to take a knockaway and turn it into a pick. It's that one step that's the difference between a pass breakup and a pick. The elite ones have the ability to make that quick step, no wasted movement, and drive on the football to pick it off. And the guys that lack that twitchiness, the guys that are just good or average or less than, they don't have that ability. And so that's just a knockaway or it's a completion for them. And so he's one of those guys. He's not elite. To me, he's in that next category down. He's above average, but he's not elite. The elite guys drive on it and pick it off. He's that guy that drives on it and knocks it away. So either way, still forces a punt on 3rd and 7. I'll take it every day of the week. I'd love the interception, sure. But I also love getting the football back by any means necessary. And if that means knocking the football away on a great play on 3rd and 7, I'll take that too. So, look, I may love him more than most, okay? I'm pretty sure I do at this point. I don't care. You're not going to make me feel bad about how I feel about Kris Boyd here in the 7th round. This is rare. I don't do this very often. But here, in the 7th round, 217th overall selection, defensive back out of Texas, Kris Boyd, for me, is and I'm going to tell you right now, my comp for him, he's Malcolm Butler. Think Malcolm Butler when you think of Kris Boyd. He's a smaller corner, physical at the line of scrimmage. Malcolm Butler can be beat because his transition isn't the greatest, but Malcolm Butler is always around the football. All right? He's always there. It doesn't always end in an incompletion, but he's sticking his hand in the cookie jar trying to see what he can get. And sometimes guys just make plays and come down with the ball. But Malcolm Butler is always there. All right? That's how I feel about Kris Boyd. So I'm just telling you, he's Malcolm Butler, and if given the opportunity, this guy's gonna impress. I feel like that. I just do. Going on to the next 7th round pick, 239th overall selection, wide receiver out of Oregon, Dillon Mitchell is the pick. So Dillon Mitchell is a guy that the Vikings decided to take to give them a chance to upgrade the wide receiver position here in the 7th round. And I'm going to go ahead and take wide receiver off the needs list as the final need that the Vikings had going into the draft, says me. And now they've taken care of every single one of those needs. As I said, you got 12 players that you select in the draft. You better handle every single need that you had going into the draft. And that's what the Vikings did. By selecting not one but 2 wide receivers. We'll talk about the second one here in a second. But Dillon Mitchell for me is a guy that is very intriguing. A lot of talent here, but there's stories going around about the lack of work ethic, and you can see some of it show up on tape. But I've heard he's got a little bit of an attitude problem. I don't know any of these things to be true. I just go off of the tape. I don't know these players personally. And so I can't vouch for anyone. I don't know any of these scouts, and I don't know who's saying what and what agendas anyone may have. I can't speak to any of that stuff. I can just tell you what I see on tape. And listening to some of the complaints about Dillon Mitchell and then matching it up with the tape, some of it may ring true because you see some of these things rear its ugly head on the field. Let's get to his breakdown quickly. 6'1", 197 pounds, 4'4", 640 guy, 36.5-inch vert. So he obviously is an athlete, a smooth, fluid athlete that isn't polished as a wide receiver, but has the tools to be a contributor at the next level. Routes are very bland at this point, rather relying on athleticism and speed to win at this very moment. Often mistimes his jumps on 50-50 balls. Hands are average at best. His hands are very sketchy. Look, the one thing I can't take, and me being a guy that had aspirations of being a receiver once upon a time, and loving the position and really analyzing and critiquing that position harder than any other, I can tell you firsthand, his hands aren't legit, and he's not working on them. He's not staying after practice on the jugs machine and putting in an extra 100 to 200 balls. Because if he were, his hands wouldn't look the way that they do. A lot of these catches are getting through his hands to his body, and he's sticking it against his pads, and he's getting bailed out by some balls that just stick. But his hands are not official. They're not A1, and that's a problem for me. You already got a guy on your team with less than official hands. You don't need another one. But is good with the football in his hands and has the ability to play both out wide and in the slot. So there are some things here to work with, but if he's going to make this football team, and I've heard nothing but good things about him thus far, it's early, it's minis. I really don't care about what transpires in minis. Talk to me about training camp. That's when shit gets real. That's when the pads go on. That's when things get serious for me. But look, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Obviously, he's making a very good impression on the coaching staff right now, and maybe his work ethic has gotten better at this point. But I can tell you this much. He is far from polished. He's far from a finished product. But the talent here, he immediately goes to the 3rd best receiver on your football team if Laquan Treadwell continues to trip. And at this point, you have to have little to next to no confidence in Laquan Treadwell's ability to get it done if you're a Vikings fan. So looking at your roster, the way it's constructed, after Thielen and Diggs, this guy might be your 3rd best option at receiver. That's how little depth you have at the receiver position right now. So receiver was definitely a need for this team. I told you I actually like Chad Beebe, but I wouldn't be opposed to adding a guy like Dillon Mitchell in the slot. I think he's a guy that could really do some really good things for you in the slot, along with Stephon Diggs and the slot work that he does. I don't hate this pick. I don't. In the 7th round, I actually think this is good value. And he was here for a reason, though. You know, and there's some issues that you got to comb over and peel through. But if you're able to get those to be put to rest, you may have gotten yourself a steal here in the 7th round with Oregon wide receiver Dillon Mitchell, who I deem as You ask me who his comp is, I will tell you it's T.J. Jones, the ex-Notre Dame Fighting Irish product that was drafted by the Detroit Lions in the mid to late rounds some 5 years ago or so. I was a huge T.J. Jones fan at Notre Dame. I'm a Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan. Got to see him up close and personal. Really solid football player. A lot of what T.J. Jones did that got him drafted, Dylan Mitchell is doing now. Similar body type. T.J. Jones I think his hands were a little bit more official than that of Dylan Mitchell, but same frame, same speed, same abilities, same routes, all of that stuff to me is pretty much on par with one another. So I see a lot of T.J. Jones in Dylan Mitchell. Finally, we go to your last two 7th round picks. We'll get through these very quickly. 7th round pick, 247th overall, wide receiver out of Colorado State. Olabisi Johnson is the pick. So Olabisi Johnson is the selection, and he just goes by BC at this point. So I think that's what he's more comfortable being called, BC. But in any event, 6'4", 204 pounds, 4'5", 140, 38-inch vert. A well-built wide receiver that was overlooked while at Colorado State behind bigger-named wide receivers. He was behind Rashard Higgins in his freshman and sophomore year. In his junior year, he was behind Michael Gallup and Preston Williams. And in his senior season, Preston Williams was still there. So he was never the number one guy. Oftentimes, he was the third option on the team. He was bumped up to the second option in 2018, but he's a really solid football player, but went about his business human-like and did all the dirty work and took whatever work was available. Nothing he does stands out, but everything he does is effective. He's a solid route runner. I saw him, his hands are better than that of Dylan Mitchell. Saw him go down, dig out some passes. You watch Dylan Mitchell and you watch him in the Stanford game, you're like, man, this guy's amazing. And then you watch him in the Michigan State game, you're like, man, this dude's got a long way to go. When I watched Olabisi Johnson on tape, it looked the same every game. I was like, well, that's pretty much what I thought I was going to get. 5 catches, 57 yards, a touchdown, human-like day. 7 catches, 78 yards, 3 third down conversions in those 7 catches. Another solid day. I mean, that's what I got from him. No drops, just solid performance after solid performance. Didn't stand out in any way, shape, or form. He blocks, which Dylan Mitchell doesn't do in the run game. He does all the dirty work, all the stuff that doesn't go noticed, but that's what he was asked to do at Colorado State because the bigger name guys got all of the hype and the attention. I think he's a solid addition, and I wouldn't be shocked if he made your football team too, just being honest with you. My comp for him is Jericho Cotchery. I see a lot of the same traits that we saw out of Jericho Cotchery during his 9, 8, 10-year NFL career. A guy that never was the number one option. Maybe early on in his career with the Jets, he might have been the number one guy in New York, but was never really thought to be a threat to take it the distance or a guy could take the top off the defense. Never really threatened the defense and made them worry. But on 3rd and 7, Jericho Cotchery, you knew he could get it done, and you knew he was going to do all the dirty work. He was going to go over the middle of the football field. You know, he was going to run all of the routes on the route tree. I feel the same way about Olabisi Johnson. So in the 7th round, 247th pick, wide receiver out of Colorado State, Olabisi Johnson for me is... So I'm going to wrap this thing up quickly. I'm not even going to go through the minutia of your 7th round, 250th overall selection. Austin Cutting is the pick. Long snapper out of Air Force. Look, bottom line is he's a long snapper. You didn't break any rules here. I told you you're going to select a specialist. 5th round or later, I don't have any problems with it. It's a long snapper, though. Like, what are we doing? You could have got this dude off of waivers after the draft, all right? Free agent acquisition. But you didn't want to compete with everybody. You wanted to take him in the 7th round. bruh, he's your 12th pick in this draft. At this point, this was one of those, all right, bruh, we've been here 27 hours, 12 picks. Who gives a shit? Turn the card in with a name on it. Let's get the hell out of here. That's what you did here. Hey, you need long snappers, right? It's a long snapper, though. What do you want me to do here? All right, so that was the Vikings draft, man. God damn, that was a marathon. It was long, but it was also productive. It's what the Vikings do with Rick Spielman. They take a bunch of players, and a lot of times these guys make the roster. They make the football team. It's a reason why they're not very active and overly aggressive in free agency, because they don't have to be. They've got a constant influx of young, cheap options coming into their football team. They do it the right way. I may bitch and moan and complain about 12 picks, but it works for them. Doesn't work for every team in the league, but it works for them. And it was another solid draft. And I think they're going to, at worst, they're probably going to come away with 8 players that make their football team out of a 12-player draft. I could see that happening. I'd be shocked if it was anything less than 7, but I could see 8 of these guys realistically making their football team in 2019. Is that a lot? Sure it is. It's for a team that we think probably going to be a playoff team most likely in 2019, or at least compete for a postseason spot. That's a lot of roster spots to be given up to new players, but I could see that happening. Let's get to the score that the Vikings were able to post with this draft. So that's going to do it for the Minnesota Vikings and their 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up. I'm your man, Louie Tee. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't already done so, what are you waiting on? Subscribe to the Louie Tee Network for more great content. Also, check out the Louie Tee Network podcast available on Stitcher, Google Music Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and, of course, the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. I'm your man, Louie Tee. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage. It could be. More great content coming your way, so don't you go anywhere. Until next time, I'm signing off. Have a good one.
Louie Tee Network.